Okay, everybody, Dennis Prager here. Those of you who listen to me regularly know that I am preoccupied with an issue that is ignored by, for that matter, most conservatives, let alone, of course, people on the left don't ignore it, they affirm it. And that is the reordering of male and female as distinct entities and what is happening, the form of child abuse that is taking place in the country, pure, undiluted child abuse. Like teenage girls who get their breasts taken off in surgery because they want to be a boy. And the New York City law that came into effect January 1st, that a parent can now, on a birth certificate of a child born in New York City, mark X, where it says sex, or gender as the current fad is, male, female, or X. At birth, my friends, at birth. There is another person preoccupied with this issue, Abigail Shrier, who writes terrifically at the Wall Street Journal, and she has a course coming up at Prager University, I'm proud to say. Abigail, your latest piece on rapid onset gender dysphoria is a critical reading. We're putting it up at our website. Anyway, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
It's very sweet of you to say. There are so many lines in your piece about this rapid onset gender disorder that are worthy of noting. And one of them is, I want to get this straight in my mind. Where do the pediatricians of the country stand on these matters?
That's a great question. Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Pediatric Endocrine Society have now moved to affirmative care. That means they believe their job is to affirm the self-diagnosis of minor children. So a minor child will now come in and say, I'm gender dysphoric, or actually they will usually say, I'm transgender, which is not a medical diagnosis, but that's what they will say. And they believe the job of the pediatrician is to say, yes, you are. I will now use your name that you supply and your pronouns. The problem with this, of course, is that often when a child is goes through this, and I'm not talking about young children, but we're now seeing a huge rise in this, a really astronomical rise in this among adolescents, which we had not seen ever before. Usually they have other underlying psychiatric problems. And the problem is when you turn around and affirm, when you're a doctor and you're supposed to safeguard, these minors, and instead you affirm their diagnosis, they will not get treatment for the underlying medical problem. And often they have one. They have a lot of anxiety. They have a lot of depression.
I'm quiet because I'm thinking about how yet another institution in society has been ruined by the left, and that is medicine, specifically here with pediatricians. I know that there are dissenting voices among pediatricians. There's a small group that has another name. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think there is. You mean the College of Pediatricians?
Yeah, whatever
right?
It's called. Yes, yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm familiar with it. I don't know much about it, but I understand. I do understand as a lawyer that when you change the standard of care for all these pediatricians, what you're doing is signaling to them liability. You're opening them up to liability if they don't follow their standards of care. It's a really effective means of silencing the medical community.
Right. So what? An 8-year-old girl comes into the pediatrician's office and says, "Doctor, I'm really a boy," and he can't say, "You know what? So many little girls have gone through that stage. You're actually a girl. Everything will be all right." If he says that, he's open to a legal action. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the standard of care has yes, it will. I mean, I believe the change in the standard of care will open them to liability. But here's the thing: it's not even that we're seeing it with the 8-year-olds. gender identity disorder, what we now call gender dysphoria, used to be something that occurred in a tiny fraction of a percentage of the population, and it was young children who actually believed they were the opposite gender.
Yeah, all right, hold it there for one moment. Abigail Shrier is my guest. Her piece is up at the Wall Street Journal and up at my website. Abigail Shrier is a writer, frequently now for the Wall Street Journal. One of the few people, aside from me, I will fully acknowledge that, who is sounding the alarm about the war on children in the United States of America, waged by every institution virtually, religious institutions, as you point out in your column, and the medical profession, the psychotherapeutic profession, and of course the media in creating really.
And public schools.
Oh yes, and public schools.
Public schools, can't forget public schools because they are aggressive. Curricula are being rewritten. Planned Parenthood.
Give us an example. What does it mean a curriculum is rewritten?
Sorry. So there are several ways. In California, we now have Positive Prevention Plus, their new curriculum, which is rewritten to first it presents as biology. So what we'll teach children about is their health curriculum and things like sexually transmitted disease, which of course is factual and medical and scientific. And in this course, they will also teach things about how gender identity is in your head, and that, for instance, a boy can essentially have a girl's brain. That this idea of identity is in your head. There's of course no basis for this. There's no sense that, obviously the...
Why is this even taught? I don't understand. Where is it taught? In a biology class? Where is it taught to a fifth grader?
It's taught it's taught in their health program that they now teach in schools. They have them, throughout the country. Throughout the country, they're teaching this. Obviously, Fairfax County is teaching this, but there's also been efforts to move this into other areas of the curriculum. So there's been a huge effort in public schools to move, more transgender-sensitive material into history because they say they've been excluded from history.
How do you do? I'm sorry. I know about that, but I understand. Well, you could say, so this inventor was really gay, or here are blacks that you haven't heard of. What transgender has made great contributions that we are unaware of?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can only say that what they are doing is they will say, for instance, when they talk about male and female, it is no longer, that is they will no longer present those as the only options, of course. They openly teach gender fluidity, which means that there are actually a series of options, and they pretend, and this is the false science of it, they pretend to say there are gender fluid options, binary, male, female, non-binary options. But of course, because there's no scientific basis for this, there could be 4,000 genders. There's no reason to pick 4 or 3 or an infinite number. But it's taught as fact.
Are there really teenage girls having their breasts removed?
Absolutely. And in fact, as they are lowering the age of medical consent in California.
Without parents.
That's
critical.
And I talk to parents whose daughters, and these are girls, this is not traditional gender dysphoria. These are adolescent girls who experience no dysphoria in childhood, and then they go through puberty and they feel uncomfortable in their bodies, and somebody tells them, maybe you're really a boy.
That's right.
Maybe you are trans.
Right.
And then they can go out and get these treatments.
And no therapist in California can say you're not a boy.
That's exactly right. And they don't even need a therapist note. They can go to a gender clinic and ask for testosterone, and all they need to do is give their informed consent, meaning I'm aware of the risks, and I waive liability.
I think we should have a list. I don't attack people by name as a rule, but obviously public figures is a separate issue. But I would like to have a list. The following surgeons cut off girls' breasts because they say they're boys, and have a list of these monsters.
It's funny, they actually do. That is available on the internet. I've seen it because I was one of the parents I talked to. Their daughter, without their permission, ran off to get her breasts removed. These girls become these teenage girls become somewhat hysterical once they discover this community that they think they're a part of. And they're suffering from a lot of anxiety and depression to begin with, so they're desperate to belong. And there are surgeons throughout the country who will even perform the surgery without so much as a psychiatric note, suggesting that this is necessary or a good idea.
Who pays these surgeons?
Okay, that is a good question. First of all, under Obamacare, a lot more of this is covered. So, in the universities, a lot of these kids were able to get treatment at very little cost. Because the university health plans are covering this. So it's much easier for a kid who's troubled, who's going off to college with some anxiety, to come home with a beard. And that's happening.
Oh, God, do I feel for these parents. By the way, you point out in your piece how these girls stop talking to their parents, but they continue to pay their tuition, their rent, and their phone bills. Dear parent, if your child doesn't speak to you, don't do a damn thing for them. This is a Dennis Prager public service announcement.
It's very, I have to tell you, I have a lot of sympathy for the parents on this issue because, first of all, these are the ones who are afflicted in adolescence with this sudden, social contagion are overwhelmingly girls, and they're girls with a history of mental health problems.
Right.
They have anxiety and depression.
Right, but they don't acknowledge that. They don't have a problem. Society has the problem.
Right.
Because it doesn't recognize that they're really boys.
Right, but it's very hard for parents to cut off a child who they know has a history of mental health issue.
Right, but it's
that's why the parents are
right. But not speaking to your parents is a moral issue. Abigail, keep up the good work. I look forward to your video coming out for Prager University. You're doing important stuff.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Great to be on your show.
Sometimes I just want to hear the theme, I have to admit. I really like it. Since 9/11, it's a battle theme. It gets more appropriate, unfortunately. Then it was about Islamic terror. Today it is about the internal, domestic, nonviolent civil war we're in. I have as a guest now, one of the most clear-thinking, knowledgeable people about world events that I know of. George Friedman is founder and president of Geopolitical Futures. It's a private intelligence service that assesses events from a geopolitical perspective. His new 2019 forecast has just been published, available at geopoliticalfutures.com. A link to that is up at DennisPrager.com. What I appreciate about Mr. Friedman is his dispassion. With all the interviews of him that I have done, I still don't know his politics. That's quite something. Sort of like Johnny Carson in a very different realm. George Friedman, welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you, and I think you can guess my politics.
Yes, I can guess, but it doesn't. That's not what persuades you to the conclusions you reach. That's what I mean.
True, but I mean, look, the world is filled with opinions. They don't need mine.
That's a great line. I have the opposite view. The world is filled with opinions, and it does need mine.
And there we go.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I do what I do for a living, and why you do what you do for a living. All right, so now we're together. So I have all right. The first, and I actually said to my producer, "What will George Friedman say?" And this is what I mean by, even if I have a sense of your politics, I still don't know always what you'll answer. So what do you think of the president's statement of withdrawing 2,000 U.S. troops from Syria?
In the long run, it's exactly what he has to do. 2,000 troops aren't enough to accomplish anything but they can take casualties. In the way he did it was, I think, a mistake, and he's backing off from it. When he said he would do it in a week, you can't withdraw 2,000 troops scattered over a battlefield in a week. You can't do that. Now he's gone back, or at least Bolton has said he's gone back to it'll take 5 months and will take some planning and so on. So I think with Trump, he frequently says exactly what we should do. Then in the second step, he says to do it in a way that can't be done, then finally gets back to the right point, which is over the next 5 months we'll withdraw.
Right, okay. But haven't they even pulled back further and now saying only if Turkey guarantees us not to invade or otherwise persecute the Kurds?
Yeah, and the Turks are not going to be able to do that for their own internal politics. A lot of the country just hates the Kurds. So we're probably going to be there, but this is what I don't like. I don't like 2,000 troops scattered about in a possible crossfire where we don't have enough force there to win. Now, we got in there because of previous administrations. It wasn't Trump, okay? But now it falls to Trump to figure out how to be secure in a really bad place where our own interests, well, they're not clear. There are other powers in the region who have bigger interests. Israel is one. Turkey is another. Saudi Arabia. Now, the Israelis will ante up if we ask them to. The Turks are hostile. The Saudis are going who knows which way. So this is a typical bog. I mean, not enough troops in a place where they can get hit. We don't want to put more troops in. We don't want to pull them out. We keep getting these positions, and I have to say that we got into this position by the way that essentially Obama organized the war against the Islamic State. It was incoherent, and now Trump is stuck with it. So I'm not meaning to criticize Trump on this. He's got a nasty situation. But he's going to have to deal with it, and he's the president. He's going to get the grief.
All right. So let me go further here. Do you have knowledge or a sense either of Israel's reaction to this decision?
Israel's reaction was appalled, not because they wanted the troops there, but they wanted the United States to be exposed there. Let's be very frank. Israel wants the United States to share the risk. Israel doesn't need the United States. It can handle it itself, but it wants to know the U.S. is there. And Israel is also appalled at the way he did it, just suddenly getting off the phone and announcing it, not even consulting with them. So I don't think Israel needs us there for military reasons. I think they need us there for political reasons, and that's another thing to consider.
Is it fair to say that this has strengthened Russia and Iran?
Well, it hasn't weakened them, okay? I mean, Russia and Iran each have some terrific weaknesses of their own. They're not in a position to exploit it too much. What it has really done is, the Trump administration put together an alliance between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. Netanyahu has made a visit to Bahrain. He's probably going to Saudi Arabia. They have changed the entire dynamic of the Middle East. This is not noted by many people, but this is an extraordinary thing that happened, all built around dealing with the Iranians. Now, we have to really watch that coalition and make sure that it doesn't get unstable. And action like this can raise the question, are we all on the same page, guys? And we really want that coalition to work. So on the one hand, he did this brilliant thing. His son-in-law wants to negotiate it. And it was just extraordinary building this coalition. Now, easy does it, guys.
Netanyahu is going to visit Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, there's a word out a number of places that he's planning a visit to Riyadh.
I need to tell you that I can't even think of an analogy of something that's, to me, more dramatic than Nixon going to China.
It's, to me, since I was watching that real closely when Nixon did that, probably on the same order with this. There's already been plenty of indications, meetings going on between the Saudis and the Israelis. So that either way, it is a huge reversal of the entire structure of the Middle East. It redefines it in a way that allows the American coalition to deal with the Iranians. It puts Turkey in a position where they're going to really have to come forward in exchange for getting the things they want. It deals Russia out of the game. Trump doesn't get any credit for this, by the way. Nobody even notices. But it really was a historical event on the order of Nixon.
So did Trump do this, or did Iran do this, or both?
The president of Iran did it. When Iran had Iraq, it was in Syria, it was in Yemen, it was in Lebanon. Everybody got frightened. What happened was a meeting in Jordan.
Well, wait, forgive me. Every Sunni got frightened.
Every Sunni got frightened. Every Jew got frightened.
Right.
It is.
And every
a
Kurd.
Very dangerous situation for them. There was a meeting in Amman between the prince in Saudi Arabia. Netanyahu apparently was there. It was done very quietly, and an agreement was reached. This is when the Saudis announced they were buying Iron Dome, which is Israel's air defense system, which was extraordinary. So when we look at all these things, Trump has achieved a transformation in the region, certainly on the order of Nixon, okay, and China. But now comes the hard part, which he has trouble with. The nitty-gritty, tiny little pieces that have to constantly be working. So nothing, what he did in Turkey is not going to blow up the alliance. Nevertheless, easy does it, and he doesn't have that hand. He's learning, I hope, but right now, not.
How strong is Erdogan's position in Turkey?
If wishes could get rid of a guy,
yeah, not needless to say,
he's gotten rid of. He's in a pretty powerful position.
Still is. He still is, even with the weakening Turkish currency.
Even with that, I mean, there are a lot of people who are unhappy.
All right, hold on. We'll hear more. The World explained to you, George Friedman, the best person I could think of to do it, founder and president of Geopolitical Futures. There's a link up at DennisPrager.com. Okay, everybody, Dennis Prager speaking with George Friedman, one of the great analysts of the world in which we live, founder and president of Geopolitical Futures. There's a link up at DennisPrager.com. It's a private intelligence service. So I want to go back to the Middle East, back to specifically Saudi Arabia. Why did they kill Khashoggi?
Well, that is a mystery, and let's begin with 2 points. Khashoggi was the nephew of a man called Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi was very close to the regime and one of the biggest arms dealers in the world, and one of the richest men. He also worked for a man called Turki al-Faisal. Turkey was the head of Saudi intelligence. This was back in the 80s. So this guy does not come out of the liberal wing of Islam. This guy is hardcore Wahhabi. Now, he presents himself, and the Washington Post accepts that he is a liberal Democrat, and maybe he became one. I don't know.
Saudi dissident, that's their term.
Yeah, well, he's certainly a dissident. He does not like any of the reforms that are being carried out. He comes from the old conservative wing of the Saudi kingdom. And so, yeah, he is. But now, again, that was 10 years ago. Now he may be a liberal. I don't know. Now we have 15 people come to the embassy to kill him. Now, I've read up on this, and it doesn't take 15 people to kill someone. Somebody wanted that noticed. Erdogan jumped on it out of nowhere, as if he deeply cared about the life of Khashoggi, a man who himself has no problem killing when he has to. So he's suddenly outraged. So I don't know what this was all about, but I know this much. It had one effect. It turned Saudi Arabia into a pariah regime. Very soon after, it formed its alliance with Israel and reshaped the region. And everybody wanted to isolate it, which would have collapsed the alliance, which would have certainly helped the Iranians. And so all I know is I don't know who this guy was. I knew what he used to be. Maybe he changed. I have no idea why 15 people showed up in the embassy. I have no idea why Erdogan cares, but I do know that this entire edifice that was constructed almost collapsed under the pressure. It's been stabilized. Everybody's forgotten about it, sort of, and things go on. But it was one of the weirdest things I've seen.
I can't speak for others who interview people, but when I ask questions, I really want to know the answer. Because I like you, I have no idea why he was killed. This whole thing is sort of what Churchill described the Kremlin, a riddle wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in an enigma, or anyway, he used those three terms.
My guess is that somebody really wanted to destabilize Saudi Arabia.
Somebody
because of the alliance, probably from among conservatives in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay, that's what I was going to add. From within Saudi Arabia. Oh, I get it. God, is that Orwellian? Oh, or Machiavellian. I see.
Because the thing was, the entire propaganda machine was ready to roll. This guy wasn't dead yet, and they were already... Every aspect of the propaganda machine was rolling. You couldn't miss it, and suddenly the prince was, the worst guy in the world, having been the best guy in the world for the New York Times. So I have to guess that the only reason that they suddenly wanted him, aside from making sure he doesn't take any money — remember, he arrested a bunch of these people and squeezed money out of them before — they didn't like this alignment with Israel one bit, or they were using it as an excuse to get rid of him. But this was an attempt to overthrow the regime.
All right, but my original question was, who was Khashoggi? And I just want to, before we move on, you said he's Wahhabi. I mean, for those who don't know, that is the most Islamist, to use a modern term, strain of Islam. That is the severe women can't drive cars type of Islam in Saudi Arabia. Is that who he was?
That's who his uncle was, and that's who he worked for. Turki Faisal was the head of intelligence. He worked for him. Adnan Khashoggi was the money man and the arms dealer for the old regime. Now, that's who he was. People change. I can't swear to what he believes now, but I just have this feeling that Khashoggi really was a way for them to get at the regime and was not important. He was not the key. He just had to go and be taken out.
But you believe the Crown Prince did order it?
Well, I mean, he's admitting it, or sort of admitting it or something, but I'm not sure it's true, or he may have ordered it because his intelligence apparatus told him that Khashoggi was up to something designed to take him down, and then they turn it around. I mean, now we're in a house of mirrors.
Okay, I agree. All right, let me move on to the another very far away part of the world from the Middle East, that is the Far East, and to China. And there is a story today about let's see, let me get the details for you up here. This is, give me one moment, because China, here we are. This is from The Sun in England. China confronts U.S. with fury as American missile destroyer sails through disputed South China Sea in challenge to Beijing. You know anything about that? It just happened.
Oh, we do it all the time. And they always confront us with fury. They make very careful not to confront us with ships, aircraft, or anything else. Look, they don't have the ability to come up against the U.S. Navy. In addition, if that happened, then the tariffs would become become a complete blockade on Chinese trade, and they depend on selling to us. So I was just in Beijing a couple of weeks ago, and I was meeting with a bunch of leaders and talking about, what was going on, and they made it clear two things. They were furious, and they were terrified. So in case of this...
Wait, furious at whom and
forgive... 10 years they've been frightened, terrified, angry, whatever. For 10 years they did nothing. I don't think in the 11th year they're going to.
Wait.
Than they look.
George, they're terrified and furious at us?
Of course.
I see. Okay. Fascinating. All right. Got a lot to talk to him about. George Friedman of Geopolitical Futures. Link is up at my website. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. I am speaking with George Friedman. A few times a year I do. I don't know anybody who has a more clear perception and original thinking on the state of the world than he. He's founder and president of Geopolitical Futures, a private intelligence service that people subscribe to. You may. And there is a link to it at DennisPrager.com with his 2019 forecast. Talking first about the Middle East, now about China. China has just announced in pretty severe terms that Taiwan is, of course, an inseparable part of China. And I assume it is simply fair to say that were it not for American protection, China would invade Taiwan tomorrow.
Well, actually, China doesn't have much of an amphibious capability. And invading an island far away, as we learned during World War II, is very hard. You've got to not only land the troops, you've got to supply them. The Taiwanese have a fairly decent air force. It'd be difficult for them to do it. What the Chinese are doing now is making announcements that appear to make them ferocious in a military sense. What they're doing that for is domestic consumption, because the situation inside of China was getting much worse prior to the American tariffs. Now, with the tariffs, you have the Chinese financial system staggering. So what you see in Russia, what you see in China and other countries, when you're weak domestically, play a foreign hand. But they're also very careful, because I pay very little attention to what countries say. I look at what they do. And what the Chinese have done is nothing. But it's useful to make it appear you're ferocious to your own public when you really can't do much to help them economically.
Well, on the what they do issue, they are doing something, to the best of my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, and that is cracking down more on whatever free speech and access to speech they had on the Internet than before.
Absolutely. I mean, they are cracking down. They are purging people from the party, and we never see them again. The regime is terrified. It's terrified, as I said when I talked to a lot of them, that this financial crisis is going to destabilize them. And anywhere they see a threat, on the Internet, among entrepreneurs, they are going to crack down. They are feeling the pressure from the United States. They understand how powerful the United States is potentially, and they are trying very hard to calm everybody down in a kind of strange way by letting them know that Beijing is still in charge.
So what is your take on his tariffs, on the president's tariffs?
Well, what Trump did is he played to our strongest suit. We're really not good in counterinsurgency. We're very good in economics. One of our strengths is we export only 12% of our GDP, almost half of that to Canada and Mexico. This is compared to Germany, who exports 50% of its GDP, or China, which claims about 25%, you estimate, which means we have very little vulnerability. We just don't depend on it that much, and China playing around with us is going to be 0.5% of our GDP. China really depends on the United States. By putting tariffs on and Trump has done something else, which is incentivize American companies to do business with alternatives to China, such as Vietnam, such as Thailand or Colombia. I mean, we're reshaping markets around the Chinese. They have got to get a deal. We don't. And they know this, which is why they're constantly saying we're going to be meeting next month. And then Trump says, well, we didn't have a chance to do it. Too bad. Well, maybe another month. He's playing them very nicely.
Wow. Folks, I'll just say this, I won't even ask Mr. Friedman for his reaction. I don't want to put him on the spot in this regard. Donald Trump's achievements are staggering. Staggering. It is almost an unprecedentedly productive presidency. I'll be back in a moment. I'll be back with George Friedman in a moment. I just need to comment here. The achievements of this president are so extraordinary. They so dwarf the inconsequential and destructive administration of Barack Obama. But all we hear is impeachment talk over utter trivia, like paying off prior to ever running for office, paying off or having an affair with two different women. Like that matters to me or should matter to the American people. And over trivia like that, we hear talk of impeachment. What they hate about him is he is so productive, but you wouldn't know that from any of the mainstream media. It's certainly clear in foreign affairs. Look at the Middle East with the alliance between unforeseeable alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel as an example, which George Friedman, who is the founder and president of Geopolitical Futures, was talking about. It's a private intelligence service you can subscribe to, but there's a link to it up at DennisPrager.com, geopoliticalfutures.com. So we talked about China and the tariffs and about its threats, which thus far are mostly verbal. I tell you, I do have a worry, though, that they can rile up their people with their verbal attacks on America and on Taiwan to such an extent that eventually the tail will wag the dog in China. The people will clamor for action. Is Mr. Friedman there?
Swim to Taiwan, and you can't fly planes you don't have to Guam. So at a certain point, whatever the feelings are, you have to take a look at the military balance, and that remains heavily tilted to the United States, even though somehow the papers don't seem to think so.
Right. I didn't get the very beginning of your answer because of a technical glitch here. So you're not worried about the Chinese people clamoring for some action?
Yeah, they may clamor for some action, but it's hard to swim to Taiwan is what I was saying.
Okay, fine. Okay, fair enough. Okay, that's the part that I missed. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, so now let's go to our continent. And what are the international ramifications of a wall or no wall? Well,
I would look at it this way. There are a lot of countries in the world that have fences or walls or something along their borders, okay? This is hardly a radical event. That he wants to put it in has some problems in the United States. In Texas, where I live, the border has always been crossed, and cities like El Paso have grown up half in Mexico, half in the United States. There's no great urgency for a wall here. But the real issue is the demonization of, if I can have an opinion. We believe in the rule of law. The rule of law is clear on this. It was signed into law by President Clinton, who didn't enforce it. Bush didn't enforce it. Obama did. We have a law on migration. We have a law on immigration. There's a certain way it's supposed to go. To me, the wall issue is secondary to the more fundamental question on all sides is, if we don't like this law, why doesn't Congress change it? But we do have a law, and the president has to enforce it, and it's being demonized.
You're referring to what law?
Well, the immigration law that was passed in the 1990s dictated how illegal immigrants were going to be treated, that they would be stopped, that legal immigration would be permitted, and what the rules would be, and so on. So what they're doing is demonizing the president for enforcing that law to block illegal immigration, which is the law of the land. And it baffles me. It baffles me because the idea that the United States internally should not have basic protections against foreign immigrants outside the law is crazy. Now, whether it should be a wall or not, we're going to have a long discussion.
Okay. There's one more issue I want your take on. The media regularly, regularly is really understating it, constantly refer to the presidents of the new president of Brazil, plus the previous presidents, the current presidents of Poland and Hungary, as far-right authoritarians. How accurate is that?
No more authoritarian than the leftists. Look, this is a demonization. The word populism has become a demonization. A populist is anyone who votes for a party that I don't like. What is going on in these countries is a revolt against the mainstream thinking of the last decades and 40 years before then. We've had a world since World War II that believed in multilateral organizations, in free trade, and things like that. In 2008, the system broke down. It's never quite recovered. And so we're having regimes rise up to disagree with this. They are democratically elected. I spent the past 2 months in Eastern Europe, in Hungary, where we keep hearing about Viktor Orban being an authoritarian. He was elected by an overwhelming vote that created a parliament two-thirds pro-Orban. You may not like him, you may want to defeat him, but he is the legitimate president, prime minister.
Right. What's
going on here is a delegitimization of democracy.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking you. So the press's depiction, from the New York Times to the BBC, these are people who are wrecking independent judiciaries, independent press, alternate voices, and human rights in their countries. You're saying that is fake reporting?
Well, I would put it this way. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected, a Republican-stacked Supreme Court was there because Republicans had been in charge. So he tried to stack the court. He tried to stuff it with Democrats. He failed. Was he not a liberal Democrat? Are we going to say he was a fascist? So the problem, many of these...
All right, hold on there. We'll continue.
They say the next big thing is here, that the revolution's near. But to me it seems quite clear that it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
I'm Dennis Prager. There is so much more to talk about, and we will do it in a part 2. George Friedman, founder and president of Geopolitical Futures. Sir, it is a joy to talk to you. Even my wife was riveted, and I say even because she has very high standards. She hears every show.
It's a pleasure being on here. Somebody who actually asks good questions and listens. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a nice description. Somebody who has good questions and listens. That's right. I really like that, actually. Okay, George Friedman's Geopolitical Futures has a link up at DennisPrager.com. And there's a lot to be learned there. I want to thank these callers who stayed on from the previous hour. and this is totally different, but why not end on a slightly lighter note? Brian in Chicago.
Yeah, hi there. I need to step away from my desk here real quick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context as to why this place kicker in Chicago is getting so much scrutiny for this kick. And that is as low a probability event as it is to hit the upright during a kick. And by the way, his kick didn't just hit the upright, it hit the upright and the crossbar before being bounced out. Is that this is the 6th time this season that he's done that.
That in itself is remarkable. But what do you say to my point, though, that it's not widely reported, even though it certainly is reported? In fact, the Wall Street Journal sports reporter today says, why is nobody, just as I asked earlier, why is nobody reporting on the fact that it was touched by an Eagle defenseman?
Well, it's finally starting to get some circulation, but that's probably because it wasn't terribly obvious at first. It didn't look like the trajectory.
Right, but it was known. I knew it last night before I went to bed, Pacific time. So,
well,
anyway, so I'm just curious, is the city of Chicago in mourning today?
In a way it is. In a way it isn't, because this is a really unexpected season for us. This is kind of supposed to be a rebuilding season, so we were just thrilled they got to the playoffs to begin with, so that they even had a winning season.
See, that's a nice attitude. And finally, what is the temperature right now in Chicago?
I'd say mid to upper 40s.
Same here. And I am in Southern California. Or at least same here last night. All right, everybody. Another, I hope for you, wonderful show. I learned an immense amount and enjoyed it. Okay, I got the sound effect. Thank you so much, everybody. See you tomorrow.